If you're a B2B business, a B2B tech company, or a B2B marketer, you're in the right place. Coming to you from Studio 26, this is the Interesting B2B Marketers Podcast, bringing you interesting contemporary takes, industry tips, guest interviews, and true stories from B2B marketers in the trenches. Now, here's your host, Steve Goldhaber.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Studio 26 and Interesting B2B Marketers. I am excited to have Bill Macaitis on the show today. Bill, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve.
All right, cool. So give us a quick 60-second background of who you are and what you've been up to lately.
Yeah, 60-second background. Always had done online companies. Graduated college, had my first startup, had no money, figured out how to grow companies with no money. That was very helpful. Spent about 10 years on the B2C side, large companies like IGN Entertainment, News Corp, had a couple exits there, and then went over to the B2B side. So I joined Salesforce, I worked 4 years there, then Zendesk as their CMO, took them through an IPO, and then Slack as their CMO, CRO with an eventual IPO there as well. And now I do advisory work. So I help companies grow and scale with capital efficient growth models.
Nice. Awesome. Got a great background. Okay, let's just jump in. We're going into case study number one. This one's all about brand awareness. Take it away.
Yeah. So I thought this would be a fun one because, my advisory capacity, I work with a lot of companies and they will often come to me with, hey, Bill, we got this awesome product, but nobody knows about us, right? And I found in B2B too, a lot of marketing teams seem to only have their only metric as leads, which is fine. I might say there's a couple other good metrics you should have. But, we were a growing startup looking to get our name out there. And, there's two parts of this case study. The first was like, hey, how do you create a brand? Even what is a brand, right? And so I always looked at it as a brand. It's the sum of every interaction that someone has with your company. It's not just your logo. It's not just your slogan. It's all these little interactions, right? And so we did two things, as part of this brand awareness push that I thought really helped us. One cost $0. Took some time internally, but was not like a big spender, and it's something I always recommend. So what we did is we tried to stand out a little bit. We created a very unique visual identity. The colors of our website, the colors of our app were very bold. They stood out. They looked very different than a lot of the other competitors that were in our space. And secondly, we created a unique editorial tone and voice. And what that meant was, when you were interacting on the website, or more importantly, interacting in the app itself, it was fun. It was delightful. There was a whimsical tone to it. Most B2B apps are all next, accept, cancel. They're written by developers, right?
Yeah.
I get it. But, we said, hey, what if we had our best marketer who was super creative, like write all the dialogue, write all the prompts, right? Put in little Easter eggs, and we did that. And I think that that really helped people have a different perception of their brand relationship with us, right? It was people tend to more, love us versus just, oh, this is a nice app that does this. It was, oh, wow, like I'm having I actually like these folks. I like this app, right? So that was part one. And that worked really well, right? When we would measure people's affinity towards the brand, it was always very high. And I think that was something that helped out that was super cheap. And I think anybody can do that. And also I think too, there's a myth that, hey, in B2B land, you have to wear suits, you have to talk in acronyms, you have to have, you have to be Spock and have no emotion. And I was, spending 10 years of my life on B2C and 10 on B2B. I found people are people, right? And they love brands, they love consumer brands, they love B2B brands. So don't be afraid
You're missing out. You forgot
out.
the one signature item where you have to have a podium in front of you when you speak. It's very serious.
Yes, exactly, right? Everything's scripted. So anyway, stand out because everybody has 10 competitors they're going against, right? And most of them, and that's another thing too that we saw is a lot of people, the marketing teams would invoke some of that passion, emotion, but it would just be on the website. And the minute you went into the product, everything changed. It was like white background, black text, back to everything boring, no delight, no Easter eggs, no nothing, right? Especially for those listening there in the software space, at least for us in this case study, right? If you're marketing, push into the product, push into the software, right? If you just do the website, you're really only getting a couple touches. Again, if you view it as the sum of all the touches people have with you, but people spend most of their time in the software. And even before they're buying it, they're going in the free plan, they're going in the trial. So I thought that was a great opportunity to create a brand. So that was the first part. The second thing we did was a larger media campaign. And I've actually had a lot of clients come to me now and hey, this is our first time doing it. And it's everybody's first time, right? When you start spending a good chunk of money to get your, your name out there, your brand out there. So a couple of things that I thought worked really well for us was one, we started really small. So we created a campaign. At first, it was just static assets, right? And we did out of home with it. So we did billboards and stuff. Opposed to just saying, hey, we're going to do this massive billboard campaign across the US. We chose one city. And we did saturate it, but then we measured. We said, okay, this city, what was the brand awareness before and after? So aided, unaided recall, sentiment. We did studies on it before. We get a baseline. We also did for the rest of the US. So we had a baseline, right? And then after we ran it, we said, okay, let's measure it in this city, but the control group will be the rest of the US, right? They didn't get the campaign. So, how much did they grow versus how much did that city grow? And you could see, we could kind of like literally plot it out to a point of awareness cost us X dollars, right?
Yep.
And then we said, okay, then we created a video and we're like, let's test this. But now we're going to run it in 3 cities. We're going to run like Denver, Austin, and Seattle. And then we're going to compare it again to the rest of the US or to similar sister cities, which have, similar demographics. And we would measure the brand awareness. We were also measuring pipeline and leads impact too. But again, we always had a control group and we saw it move the needle. And then we said, okay, like, let's go a little bit more, right? And in each one of these, like, I think a really important thing, at least a lesson for me, was kind of realizing that, hey, I need to update all the stakeholders on this. And when I say stakeholder, I mean really people that have a lot of sway in the company, right? So your head of sales, your head of product, your CFO, your CEO, the board, right? Like part of the reason I think we did it and it worked well that way was we were just building up confidence. Because a lot of, like, I work with a lot of companies and the marketing team a lot of times does amazing stuff, but they never kind of build those relationships externally. And what ends up happening is a lot of people are just doubt marketing. They're like, well, I don't, like, you guys just waste money. I don't know what you're doing, this or that, right? Or, oh, that didn't work, right? You're just saying it. You're just showing splashy, stuff. And so I think like walking through and showing them hard numbers, right? In a small way, getting them a little more comfortable, doing a little bit larger. And then eventually we did a national campaign, right?
Yep.
And we tested a bunch of stuff like all throughout the way. We tested like, out of home versus online. We had 2 different videos. By the way, there was another thing I learned. We worked with outside agencies. One of the videos cost $1 million. One of them costs like $50,000. There was a negligible difference between the two as far as the actual end impact. So be careful how much you spend on this creative and how big of an agency you go with. But, it was a really fun experience, right? You have to have a good fit and you have to have the right board and growth. But, eventually, again, we were growing pretty fast, but what we realized is we could accelerate that growth. And paid campaigns are what they are. They're expensive. You don't always want to use them, because if that's the only thing driving your growth or your brand, then, it's an expensive way to grow. But when you combine that with organic growth, you can help accelerate. You can help capture that market faster. So that was kind of the high level, but happy to go into any more detail if you have any more questions on it.
Yeah, so I'm going to make a comment too. The market tests, I call them matched markets, right? So you're saying here's one market and here's a comparable market in terms of whether it's size or demographics. I love that approach. I've done it a couple times. And the reason why I like it so much is that in each market, there's all these dynamics. You're usually having multiple marketing tactics, and it's hard to understand really what, in one market, if you're doing 5 different things, what's successful, right? And I like the market approach because it doesn't matter, right? Meaning, that you're doing a lot of marketing activity and you're getting this net result. So it's the closest I've seen to doing an actual business metrics on, look, we put marketing dollars in the market. Don't worry about what it was. We know that this was the impact, and you believe it or not. Right. And I love doing that. I've done it with print advertising in the past. And you just say, hey, here are 10 markets we're in. Here are 10 comparable markets. What's the delta in the metrics? It is great at sharing with leadership or salespeople because they look at it and they're like, okay, I can't argue with this. The metrics, whether it's perception, engagement, whatever it is, it's just a great way to do it.
Yeah. And it's a great point, Stephen. The nice thing I found too is it's not like it's a super expensive way to measure it. It's not like, look, I love deep dive algorithmic multi-touch attribution modeling, and we could talk for an hour on that and we'd probably lose the entire audience, but still, you can spend a lot of money on these different attribution models to try to, prove it, but there's a really simple model, and it's just like, have a control group. Even like companies doing like ABM campaigns, I work with different startups that are doing it, they're asking my advice on it. I'm like, hey, all right, you've got a top 100 list? Okay, only do the ABM campaign to 50 of them. The other 50 don't get it. Right? You have to have that control so you can show the impacts. Because I think the natural tendency of a lot of marketers, myself included, back in the day was, well, we're going to run this to everybody, right? And then it's really hard once you've done everything. Like you said, there's so many other muddying factors that come into it. It's really difficult to tease out, did this cause it? Or maybe there was like the competitor did this, or we just launched this. Like it gets really hard to prove marketing's effectiveness. And that's half the game in marketing, is just getting all these other people in the company who all think they're marketing experts to actually like believe in what you did actually made an impact.
Yep. I love that. I mean, the holdout. So I'm going to date myself. In 1998, I worked at a bank, and I was in a marketing role at a bank because I wanted access to data, right? So I'm like, I'm going to go work at this bank. I'm going to learn all about data. And they were piloting this new concept. They called it the RMS, the Relationship Management System. It's essentially, a high powerful CRM, but then it also had all these layers of financial scoring to essentially say, should we lend this person credit here or a line of credit there? And they launched it, it was a 90% rollout and a 10% control group. 2 years went by. You clearly see the decision-making engine was working and we were making more money on it. And I think to this day, they still have a 1% control group. And marketing always fights for the 1% control group to just be like, no, this is our justification. Even though we could probably market to those people and make more money off them, we need it. We need to hold ourselves accountable.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, awesome. Let's do this. Let's jump into case study number 2. This one has to do with pricing and packaging.
Yeah. So I love pricing and packaging. I think it's one of those elements that can really move the needle. A lot of times you go into marketing, we're going to do this and it's going to give us 30% lift and this 40% lift. And most of the time it doesn't do that. But pricing and packaging is one of those things that if you nail and if you get it right, it can really change the trajectory, both from a monetization standpoint, as well as just how fast your company is growing. So this is one I'm going to go back to my consumer days. And one of the things that I've been doing pricing packaging a lot. And one of the things that I found, and I'm a big believer, is the freemium model. A lot of people have debates. Does this work? Does this not? I had, been working for a faster growing company. And one of the reasons I think we really tried to think about the pricing and packaging is how pricing and packaging had evolved. So as opposed to having a free trial, which I think is, time gated or, user gated, we actually had a true free plan. And in addition, how we packaged it was as opposed to using features as the main packaging. So we had a good, better, best, bronze, silver, gold type of subscription model. We allowed pretty much all the plans to have all the features. And that's usually I think as a lot of marketers, that's our first inkling is to go, this one gets this features, this, and the free plan is really crippled where you barely get to use it. It's a really hard experience. What we did though is we used a lot of thresholds. So we said hey, you get to use all these features, but, you only get to use this one this many times per month or this many times per year, right? And I thought that did 2 really powerful things for us. And the numbers kind of bore it out. One, people were much more likely to upgrade. And what ended up happening was they started using it. It was a free plan, right? And it really got embedded. They started just using it a lot, really into their workflows. A lot of the thresholds we intentionally didn't put in until 3-6 months down the line. And, I think sometimes there's a temptation, especially in B2B, to get everything super quick because you got a sales team, they need those leads tomorrow. But my experience has always been, whether it's consumer B2B, people have a journey. They need time to see the value, experience the value before they're ready to upgrade. And so by pushing those thresholds further back, people really got to love this and use it a lot, right? And then when they finally did hit a threshold, they were much more likely to convert. It wasn't this 3 to 5% that you'll see most free to paid. It was 30 to 40%, which is kind of crazy good, right? That was really powerful for us. So we got great monetization. The other thing that was really powerful for us is it helped us grow much faster. And really thinking about it for a long time, because I've done a bunch of these, freemium type plans, I thought the best way to look at it was free users. So imagine you're the CMO, right? And you only have X amount of employees underneath you. You have a small team, 3 people, 5 people, 10 people, whatever it is. And their whole job is to go spread the word about your company, right? Well, when you have a free plan, it's every single one of those free users is a little marketing independent contractor that you just hired, and you pay them nothing, right? And all day long, they're out there, again, if they love your product, which is a big element of PLG, you got to make it that they love it, but they're out there just talking about it and recommending it and go oh, you got to check this one out. I loved it, right? And so all the companies, and this company in particular that I worked with that had free plans, we would always have really high word of mouth, right? And that's, again, when you're marketing, and especially now, every board is asking you hey, I know we're growing, but how much does it cost to get that growth? What's the capital efficiency of this growth, right? And that freemium model, what I found out was free users are good. They're really, especially if you're a marketer, free users are great. Now, I know there's a cost, there's the bandwidth costs, there's support costs, but really if you compare that cost against how much it costs you to run that brand campaign for case study one, how much that ABM campaign you're running, whatever it is, and you're getting high cost per lead, it is much, much less. And so, for us, those 2 strategies worked really well. Having a true free plan where they have access to a lot of features, so they love it, they're recommending it, and then using the thresholds on a more longer term delay where they get more value and they're much more likely to convert to a paid plan down the road.
Yeah, it's a great case study. I think it's also one, you've got to have a great product. Because if you don't, and that's maybe where some of the traditional B2B sales tactics happen, it's kind of like, no, you're not going to get to sit in the car unless you buy the car. And it's like, no, I want to drive it. I want to,
Yes.
I remember I was in the market for a car and we ended up going and getting a Tesla years ago. And it was a Friday afternoon. We kind of casually strolled into the store and he's like, oh no, we're closed this weekend. But he's like, do me a favor, just take this car and bring it back on Monday. And we had an entire weekend in the car
Wow,
and I
that's
was like,
awesome.
I'm done. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sold. Just tell me how to order. You remove any suspicious behavior of a sales,
Yep.
engagement. It's just like they believe in the product this much that they're just giving it to me. And
Yeah.
I'm glad to see that in the industry too. Like I feel like 4 or 5 years ago it was like the credit card barrier. Like we'll give you free access, but we're going to need a credit card. And now that's almost gone. I mean, I feel like you can get into a lot of software pretty quickly, which is good to see.
It's a much more
Yeah, good.
efficient way to grow, and I think from my advisory side, I have a lot of companies that reach out that do want to make that shift. I'm working with several right now, like, hey, we've gone the old way, which is like, I've hired a bunch of outbound sales reps that are cold calling. They're really expensive. They're trying to sell into
Yeah.
the CIO. They're trying to get them to buy a wall-to-wall deal. The deal length is a year plus on those. They're frustrated. It's not predictable. And when they switch to these PLG models, they're like, oh my God, we have this like sustainable, scalable inbound growth. It's predictable. We're growing much faster. People know who we are now, but it's hard, right? It's hard to make that shift. And, you have to have the right DNA for the company. You have to have the board and the CEO committed to it.
Yep.
There's a lot of misconceptions like, oh, a free plan, we can't do that. Or if you're in sales, there's a lot of fear. Like, well, what does this mean to my quota? Are they taking me my sales? It's definitely an effort to get it to go through.
Yeah. I will say too, I'll take the podcast in a negative area for real quickly. It's not a new strategy. This is the
Yeah.
drug dealer strategy from years ago. It's the, hey, check this out. It's free. You'll like it. And it's kind of like, again, I'm going to a negative place, but that's a
Yes.
strategy, right? We think you'll like this so much. Have a take at it. Okay. Anything else on the second case study you want to share?
No, I would just say, hey, in general, test these things out. Pricing and packaging, I always say for marketers, like if there's one area, I'd even say like, hey, if you're building on a marketing team and you already have like your hire a pricing and packaging specialist, have one person on your team just focus on that because of all the tactics I've seen over the years, that is the one that really moves the needle and not enough people kind of give it the love, attention, and the testing that it deserves.
Yeah. When you first started talking about packaging, I went to the CPG world. And it's interesting. A friend of mine, he had a guy who started a business and he had $1 billion exit. It was a big exit for a CPG company. And as a startup, he probably had the first couple of years was very, very entrepreneurial. And the person put, I think, $100,000 into packaging of the product. And he said at the time, it was a ridiculous decision to make. I had no business spending $100,000 on the packaging. But he said, I know that packaging got me into some key meetings and ultimately helped grow it to the exit. So that first interaction with a brand, whether it's software or a physical product, is incredibly important. Okay,
Absolutely.
let's do this. We're gonna jump into Q&A. Tell me about your first marketing gig.
My first marketing gig was right out of college, or actually during college, where we did our own startup. And I was the head of marketing, biz dev, sales. And there's like 4 people, you're doing everything. I was basically like the business person, but I loved it. And I'm a weird one. Like I always loved marketing. I always loved business. In like 5th grade, I was reading like Fortune, Forbes, and Wall Street Journal. I was like the nerd in the back, right? Just like geeking out on this stuff. So I was really fortunate. It wasn't like, what do I want to do? Like I always knew it. I was in like entrepreneur clubs and doing all these things. So, I always had an affinity and passion towards this stuff.
That's nice. I too kind of got into it in college. A buddy of mine started in your face eyewear, very in your face at the time, right? And our whole thing was, this is college, so people want sunglasses, especially during spring break. We were able to secure all these partnerships with Ray-Ban. And I was like, this is great. Like our sales pitch was go to the mall, let us know what pair of glasses you want, and then we'll order them for you at 30% off. So it is funny that for so many of us, the hustle does start really early on. And you said at the beginning of the podcast, you initially weren't into B2B. So tell me about that jump when you got into B2B. What was that the first couple of years like?
Yeah, it was an interesting transition, right? So I, at the time I was working for News Corp and I was running centralized online marketing for all of their different properties. That was everything from like Wall Street Journal to Fox Sports to American Idol and building up these brands, building up these portfolio of websites, getting them to grow faster. And, I got a call from Salesforce and they were much smaller at the time. They weren't a total startup, but, they were kind of like selling this vision of of the cloud and putting your software there. And just hearing, the vision and talking to Mark, I just kind of believed in it. I really felt like, hey, this is a good fundamental shift, right? Like, I'm amazed people are still like, buying software and buying their own servers and installing on it. And this model was just so much more a democratization. So I loved it. I went over to it. I bought into it, came in, ran all their online marketing and the website and the ops, some of the back end stuff. But it was interesting coming over to B2B though, like you are initially, I was a little shocked. Even in Salesforce, I was like, and looking at a lot of other B2B companies, I'm like, well, they're using like a really dated go-to-market model. Like there's nothing I was seeing with more innovative tactics I was seeing in consumer. I wasn't seeing at all on B2B. There was no SEO. There was no content marketing. There was no advanced hyper targeting or retargeting or this or that, right? Granted, this is like 12, 15 years ago. So really like that was part of my DNA when I came there. And I remember I had a conversation with the engineers and he was like, oh yeah, that's a suspect. And it's like, what's a suspect? I've never heard of that. He's like, oh, it's a prospect that you're not sure if they're going to be, very good, qualified to become a customer. They're a suspect. I'm like, oh, okay. But, I really enjoyed making that shift and I liked it. Like I often found like when I work with different people that have done multiple tours of duty in a totally different area or like, someone that worked on the support team that's now on the marketing team just have a completely different perspective and often brings different ideas. So I really just tried to bring like, hey, the best of consumer, which in a lot of ways is a true inbound funnel. Like you don't have a sales team when you're working B2C. There is no sales team. You are marketing and sales wrapped into one. And so you have to build these scalable engines. And so coming over to B2B, where a lot of companies were only like doing cold calling, to build like a scalable inbound model where you can now feed all of these salespeople was really powerful. And so, I loved it. I will say, I think one of the more underrated things in marketing is like you have to evangelize. You have to like educate people on why you think you should do it differently than the old way. You have to like win hearts and minds. You have to spend a ton of cycles on that. Even at Salesforce, there was a point where we weren't doing any marketing automation. And I was like, guys, we need to do this, right? And it took a lot of cycles, a lot of political, calories just to try to get that in because it was just different. We hadn't done it, right? And, the marketers, sometimes I'll see that are really good, but they'll just sit at their desk heads down and never reach out to that head of sales or the CFO or whoever your stakeholders are, right? Like it just becomes really hard to get those big change management projects through.
Yeah. So you're in an interesting position because in your career, what you've done and what you're doing today and helping boards, I mean, you're essentially, you're a marketing ambassador, teaching non-marketers and guiding them. What's your advice for everyone who's listening on the show? They're all marketers, right? So how can you help them better manage up and not just speak marketing to non-marketing people? What's a good way to connect?
I think for me, one of the things I try to do is like, hey, just have a little empathy. Like imagine you're probably in the same position. So take your CTO in your organization or your head of product, someone technical, right? If you just look across to them and you're like, what are they doing? Like, I don't know. They're working on code.
Yeah.
That person, let's say that there's a CTO that never reaches out, never talks, right? So you have no idea what their team does. You have no idea if they're good. You have no idea if they're just twiddling their thumbs all day. It's kind of frustrating. It's hard, right? So in marketing, when we kind of just go dark and silent, no one knows what we do. Now, the CTO has an advantage in that none of us know Perl programming or Java or backend technical architecture. So we're kind of like, well, I don't know what they're doing, but I don't really understand it anyway. So whatever. When you work in marketing, everybody in the company is a marketing expert, right? They've all seen ads. They've all priced stuff at grocery stores. So they're like, well, I know marketing, right? So you have a lot of people that have very strong opinions on your job and what you do. And I found the best way to do that, no matter what level you are, is like you said, Steve, like manage up, right? Like think about, okay, who are partners that rely on marketing? The product team, the sales team, the finance team, the C-suite, the board, and just start having conversations with them. They put up a once a month lunch, right? Or a virtual meeting, whatever it is. And I'm fun too. It's good to ask them like, hey, how do you think marketing's going? What do you like that we're doing? What do you not like that we're doing? Yeah. Oh, you don't? Okay. Oh, we're thinking about actually putting marketing automation. Here's why. Like, it's a little longer term, but I think it's really going to help us nurture and develop these leads so that when they go to sales, they're going to be much more qualified. You're in sales. You hate, right? When you get a lead and they don't even know who we are. Wouldn't it be great if they actually were like, oh yeah, I know who you are. I'm ready. Like, let's move, right?
Yeah.
Just spend some cycles there. Spend like 20% of your day, carve it out to like educating, evangelizing, and you'll go way more further. You'll get a lot more projects than the time if it was just spent purely like heads down, just kind of on that, that task at hand.
Yeah. What's your experience been? You've probably worked with some leaders who completely embrace marketing, right? They're just like, no, I get it. I'm all in. In fact, I'm going to give you more marketing dollars as a percent of my revenue than like other businesses, right? So like, how do you approach the people who already love marketing versus the notorious like, marketing, should I even have you around? I'm debating on just hiring 10 more salespeople.
Yeah, it's interesting because, if you stay marketing long enough, you'll get everyone, right? You'll get all those different personas. I remember I was at Zendesk once and we had an awesome CFO there. And I remember at one point he came to me and said, "Hey, Bill, if I give you more money, how many more leads could we get?" Right. And that was great. He understood that. I worked with another great CEO, Mark Jung at IGN. And this was in the gaming days, and we were doing this digital storefront. And he was like, "Hey, Bill, let's think about what if we did an arbitrage on the SCM, right? Like how much we spend versus how much we can sell in these digital games." And he got it, right? And I was like, "Yes, like I know that. I love that. Let's talk about arbitrage and how we can fund this, right?" The good and the bad of those personas are that, or even a CEO that loves marketing and wants to get it. The good and bad is like, good, you're going to get resources. The bad sometimes is that, like, I've worked with some CEOs, I love them, they're all great, but like sometimes they love marketing, but like, hey, like I want it this way. It's got to be this way. Like I love marketing so much that they're going to be very in the weeds. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's not good. Like as a CEO, sometimes you don't want to be like writing every single bit of copy on every single bit of ad or email that goes out. Or sometimes it'll frustrate the team because they're like, well, which leader is it? Is it CEO making the calls? Is it CMO? Like how does that work there? And then on the flip side, you're going to have sometimes, you'll see it a lot on especially technical startups, right? Or anything that focuses on more like back-end or developer software, DevOps stuff is a lot of times you have founders that are completely not go-to-market at all. They were developers themselves. They went through the ranks. They're making their startup. And so that can be good from the standpoint of like, hey, you're usually empowered. They don't know what you're doing. So you're like, hey, go do marketing. But on the bad side, they don't know marketing. So I was doing a one-on-one with someone 2 days ago on a team that I was advising. And she was just really frustrated because it was like, hey, I killed myself, work 80 hours a week. Like I did these things over the last 3 months that were gargantuan. It would have taken like 10 people to normally do this. But the CEO was like, "Oh, well, I thought that would take like 1 day," right? Like, because they don't know. They don't know what they don't know, right? Like, oh, we're going to put in multi-touch attribution. Okay, that'll take an hour. Like, how long does that take, right? So, you have to spend a lot of time. I always say like part of your job as a marketer is to educate your CEO or these stakeholders on what marketing is, how long things take so that they can be successful. Because again, same thing. Like if I'm all of a sudden turn around and I have a team of engineers or developers, I'm not going to know like how long stuff takes. Marketing, we're notorious for that. Hey, backend developer, can you make these changes on the website? That should take you 5 minutes, right? And they just kind of chuckle, right? Like, what are you talking about, Bill, you idiot? Have some empathy and just realize, like, identify which persona it is and then try to, a lot of times I'll tell the folks too, like, you got to view it as a marketing campaign. Like, you have to go, okay, CEO, what's my content that I'm going to educate them with? How am I going to nurture it? How am I going to identify the persona, what they think about marketing, what they like, what they don't like, and how am I going to run cycles to influence that and move the needle on it? It takes a lot of time. These are long-term projects.
Yeah. I'm envious of you. You do a lot of good advisory work for boards. I mean, what's most exciting in that? Is it access to the different, you could have a conversation in the morning that is completely different in the afternoon. Like, what do you enjoy most about the advisory stuff?
For me, so I was in a really fortunate place. I had a number of exits and I was like, what do I do? Do I retire? Do I become a VC, which I had a couple offers there? Or do I kind of go down the advisor path? Advisor/board member path. And I just knew like when I was going through a lot of these companies, I never really had access to advisors. And I really wanted one. I wanted people that could help mentor me or give me advice or give me different ideas or tell me what worked. Or as much as you're hearing the good stories, I have lots of bad stories where things like, cataclysmically like failed when I tried something, right? And so I wanted someone to tell me like when they had that, so I wouldn't do it. And so, I had access to a lot of boards, but a lot of those boards, frankly, were very like financial folks that had financial backgrounds, not really operators. And so I've really loved it, and sometimes I work directly with the boards. I'll come as an independent board member. Sometimes I'll come in as an advisor and I'll work directly with the marketing team and I'll like mentor them and help them think about their go-to-market models. Like I just did a deep dive on a attribution modeling session or our session on pricing and packaging or measuring awareness and how you do it. For me, it's just really helpful because I love marketers. I just think like, it's a really hard gig. It's a fun gig, but it's a really hard gig. And, helping them think about like how they grow their teams, how they grow the company and managing those relationships is just, really gratifying for me. I feel really fortunate to do it.
What do you see kind of on the horizon? We've talked about automation. We've set a new record for any podcast that hasn't mentioned the words AI in 30 some minutes. So what do you see as the most exciting thing going on in the marketing space?
Well, I'm not going to say AI now because that would... that would go down a dark path. Without saying AI, I would say there's always something new coming out on the go-to-market side. And I think, I get that's a part of my DNA. Like I always just thought there's, you shouldn't just fall in love with one playbook and have that be it. Like I love freemium, but there might be a better model that comes out that's just more efficient, that's better, helps you grow faster, helps you monetize better. I love product-led growth stuff because I think it's a little bit more newer and different, but there's always new strategies. I remember when I got into SEO a long time back, there were no SEO classes or even books. Like I just had to go and read every single forum I could for like 2 weeks after work until I kind of became an SEO expert, right? And so without naming a specific one, AI, I think that there are always new innovations coming out, right? And whether it's go-to-market models, whether it's marketing tactics, and just being hungry and staying hungry is something that I think is really helpful for any marketer.
Yeah, agreed. The hunger is something you cannot teach. You can be really talented at what you do, but if you're not passionate and hungry, you won't go as far as a marketer. Okay, I've got 2 more questions for you.
Yeah.
This next one will be like you're on 60 Minutes doing a lifetime career achievement acceptance, but go back in time, talk to yourself as a marketer. So we talked about colleges when you first really were getting into it. What's some advice that you'd give yourself back then?
The one piece of advice I would probably tell myself would be, hey, don't believe all the stats. So I remember when I was going through school, and maybe it's just the teachers, the classes, but a lot of the business classes were like, hey, 90% of startups fail, right? Like only 2% make it, right? And it almost paints such a gloomy picture that it was like, oh, wow, this is super hard to do. Now, I still did my first startup right out of college, but even then I was like, oh man, like, the odds are against me. And I just think like now it's a golden age for innovation for startups. If you're in the software space, the barriers of entry to making a startup are so low now. There's so many great tools that have democratized access that you can really make significant traction very quickly. And so I think there's just awesome opportunity, and, I probably tell myself that. And then I probably say, hey, don't change a lot. Stay hungry, just try to learn, and you'll do all right.
All right. So my final question, I have to go AI now since we've been talking about how we can't talk
Yes.
about AI. So we'll end on AI. I'll try to give you some guardrails because the topic is so big, right? AI can be about generative content. It can be about security. It can be insights. Choose a lane that you think is going to have the most impact from a marketer's perspective. And why do you think that is going to change?
I'm going to go generative content. So yesterday I was doing a session with another company and we were doing it on SEO and content marketing, which I geek out on. I love that stuff. And it was interesting because they were talking about, well, how do we create our own content? Should we hire more people? Should we hire interns? And I was like, look, it's a spectrum. You can do that. You can hire your own people. You can do interns. There's freelancers. There's Fibers. There's all that. But there are a whole host of marketing AI companies that are focusing on generative content, right? And then at first it was like, oh, well, no, like they're gonna, the algorithm will know if it's generated or not. I'm like, maybe not. But I guess my point to them was like, hey, this is big enough. Like, I just know I've been in SEO and content marketing long enough that this will radically change that space. And I would, at least if I was an SEO professional, I would want to understand what are the different tools, how do they work, what are the pros and cons, because your competitors will absolutely start using them. And in this case, it was, we kind of ended it where it was like, hey, maybe we don't use generative AI to create all the content, but maybe it's like the first draft. Maybe it's opposed to like having nothing to start working on.
Yep.
You're like, hey, here's this keyword, like come up with a draft, right? And then, okay, we're going to like modify this with our knowledge and get it going. So, I just think for marketers, and especially with SEO content marketing, I think that's going to have a really big impact. And I would definitely want to be on top of it.
Yeah, I agree. I played a lot, with the generative space. It is amazingly powerful. I think some people will jump into the assumption that, oh, if you're in the content game, it's all about creating the actual content. I think the real power in AI is in the insights, the storytelling, and the structuring, because I love using simple prompts to say, this is what I'm doing. My target audience is this. Generate a list of problems that this audience has. And then I'll just ask them, why do they have this problem? What are their struggles? And you have this back and forth and you really get a picture of who these people are. And then you're like, I have it. Like now I have my idea of how I'm going to structure my content. And it's super powerful. If you're not playing around with a couple of AI platforms right now, you are missing out. But oh well. That's
absolutely
okay. That's okay. People will devolve and just say it's not for me, and other people are all in and they're downloading it and playing with it. So, Bill, I really enjoyed the conversation today. I appreciate you coming on the show. And people want to reach out if they want to use you for board advisory or things like that. What's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, just go to LinkedIn, Bill Macaitis. You can find me there. Just shoot me a message. Always happy to have that conversation.
All right, awesome. Thanks again, and thanks everyone for tuning in to Interesting B2B Marketers. Take care.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for tuning in to the Interesting B2B Marketers podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss an episode. If you found value in today's episode, please help grow the podcast by sharing with others and leaving a review. We'll see you next time.